Hello and welcome. I'm Bill Coons, the Artistic Director of Shaker Bridge Theater. We are starting our 12th season at Shaker Bridge Theater, and we're starting with a play by John Patrick Shanley called Outside Mullingar. Not Mullingar, Mullingar, I have learned. And the cast is here with me today, so I'd like to introduce you to them. On my left is Amy Hutchins. Immediately to my left is Michael Stewart Allen, to my right is Dottie Stanley, and to my far right is Jim Handy. So, we have just started working with this play. It requires an Irish dialect. Now, how many of you are certifiably Irish?
Well, my father was born there, born and raised.
And you have an Irish passport.
I do.
So he's the official spokesperson for Ireland.
All right, right, Billy.
So how is it learning an Irish accent? Is it different from learning other accents? Because these two people were here last year doing Constellations, where you used a kind of a standard British accent, what we call received pronunciation. How is the Irish accent different?
It's a lot more lyrical. There's a lot more inflection, and the vowel substitutions are very different too. There's a British thing called the ask list, where you have the A's, or there's the words have different vowel sounds. And,
right.
And in this one, the vowels, the A sounds very much like an American.
Like
vowel.
Glass or glass, like a glass of water. Like you say
glass,
glass,
yeah.
But
yeah.
In Irish, only the Anglo-Irish, like the very posh Irish, would say, glass, where everyone else says, glass with that sound.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's, there's a lot of...
Well, and also there's an R. When you're doing a London dialect, the R's are at the ends of words. You don't really say the R.
Right.
Father, mother, water, But Irish, you've got to say, father, mother, water. The R is really strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's always the danger of going too far and sounding like the Frosted Lucky Charms guy. So you don't want to do that either.
Right.
So.
Right. So for you two, how do you learn to do an Irish accent? Is it something? Well, you say your father grew up was Irish, so it's...
Yeah, and my relatives, who came over, his sister and his friends, my uncles, they had, some of them had really heavy Irish accents, so I was around it all the time growing up in Queens, New York. The whole neighborhood was basically 85% Irish, Woodside, Queens, which is filled with Irish pubs and Irish, so I was around it all the time, really.
Yeah.
Well, there's a website of international dialects that you can watch, and you can listen to folks from different parts of the country. But I've looked at a lot of YouTube folks that teach Irish accents in a minute. And one of the things is that rather than speaking sort of in the back of the throat like we do as Americans, things are much more in the front of the mouth and behind the teeth rather than glottal. So we say a lot of I, which really comes out. Oi, I want to go to. I want to go to the store. So I thought that was important. I think about that, but the lyricism is very important. We talked about that,
right.
Because the language of the writing itself actually helps. And the lines are beautifully written, and so that's.
Yeah. It's very poetic.
There you go.
Script.
Yes, it is.
I mean, consciously poetic, but then the Irish people are famous for being that kind of lyrical and poetic. So before we get into anything else, could you tell me who the character is that you're playing, and tell me a little bit something about the character? Let's start with Jim.
Oh, I play Tony Reilly. He's a man in his 70s who owns a farm in outside Mullingar. And he's unwilling to pass the farm on to his son, Anthony, because he believes Anthony will never marry and have children or a wife and keep the farm going, and he thinks that Anthony is a bit cracked. He takes after the other side, the Kellys, which was his mother was a Kelly. So we have this bit of a conflict because I don't treat him very well because I don't think he's capable of carrying on the name of the Reileys, and that's where our conflict arises between father and son, and it has a. I shouldn't give any spoiler. I shouldn't give any spoiler. I won't give a spoiler of how it turns out, but it's,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's a romantic comedy. We all
Yes,
know that,
right.
and so we all know how that turns out. But it's not a straight path to get there at all. And who's your character?
I play Eileen Muldoon.
Would you spell Aoife for me? I think it's just
You
fast.
would ask me that. It looks very weird. I believe it's A-O-I-F-E.
Right.
I-O, isn't it?
Yeah,
Or is it
A-I-O.
I-O? See,
It's I-O.
it starts with 3 vowels.
I-O.
It looks like a Aoife, but it's pronounced Aoife. And I am elderly and infirmed, and we've just buried my husband, Chris Muldoon, at the top of the, well, early in the day, at the top of the play.
It's such an Irish situation. Coming from a funeral and it's raining.
There we are.
What could be more
A
Irish?
great way to start a play. So we've come, I and my daughter have come to talk with the gentleman, the neighbors, after the funeral. And my concern now, because I'm close to death, is what's going to happen to my daughter, Rosemary. So I'm watching what happens. I really want my land and the neighbor's land to come together, because I'm watching these 2 youngsters who have been avoiding each other but eyeing each other for a very long time. I want to see what happens with that before. I'm very concerned what happens to my daughter before I pass. So I have a conversation with my neighbor about what's going to happen with his son, and I certainly would hope that it's a land war. There's a little piece of land between the 2 properties that is a bone of contention, and I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, as Dottie said, the 2 youngsters. Okay. Somebody says in the play, Jim says in the play, she'll never see the other side of 35.
Right,
So so these are youngsters in the sense that they're in their late 30s, early 40s. So go ahead, tell me about who you play and just a little something about the person.
I play Anthony Reilly. He's Tony's son, and he is sort of dealing with issues of self-worth, whether he's worthy to take care of the farm, whether he's worthy to be passed on, whether he's, but he's also, very in touch with nature. He loves to get in the fields, and he feels most connected to the world when he's out there. And he sort of feels put upon by the world and put upon by himself, and he has the secret that he doesn't want to tell anybody, which I'm just going to let that go.
I may have something to say about that a little later. Amy, what?
Well, I'm playing Rosemary Muldoon. I'm Aoife's daughter. I'm a very stubborn character. I'm a avid smoker, and I've got some strong passions, and I'm desperately in love with my neighbor. He's completely unaware, and I'm totally prepared to wait for the rest of my life for him to come to me. And she's just very stubborn.
Shanley said, the author said that he went back in 1993 when his father was in his 80s and could no longer drive, and so his father asked him if he'd take him back to the family farm in Ireland. And so he took his father back to this farm outside Mullingar, literally, where he met a lot of his relatives for the first time. And he met his cousin, Anthony. He met his uncle Tony,
Wow.
and his aunt Mary was still alive at that point. But one thing that was really, really interesting is he was going out for a walk on the road with his cousin Anthony, and they were walking up the road and they came to a house right next door. And Shanley said, do you know who lives in this house? So they knocked on the door, and he said, I've got to find exactly how he characterized this. A very beautiful, very animated woman answered and looked at Anthony, who has never married, his real cousin. She was electrified. I said later to Anthony, you know, that woman likes you. And he looked at me very cagey and said, do you think so? This is where all of that comes from.
Yeah.
This is really a story about his family. And it took him 20 years to write it, because 20 years after he'd been there with his father, he was sitting down in his apartment in Brooklyn looking out at the river and was all alone and felt he had nothing more to say, and he sat down and wrote a play about the farm.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's where it all comes from.
Yeah.
This is a romantic comedy. Could this be set anywhere else other than the Midlands of Ireland?
I mean, I think it could possibly work in another rural, very small community.
Now, why do you say
setting.
that? Why is that important?
I grew up in a really rural area,
Yeah.
and I recognize a lot of these farm, I don't know, there's something about the quiet,
Yeah.
what's unsaid, what you don't speak about
Right.
in these small, tight-knit rural communities where
Right.
where you can live next door and you know that there are certain things that you're not supposed to talk about. You hear like, you know, and I feel
Right.
like that setting, I feel like translates.
I will agree with you there, because after 40 years in the city, now I'm living in Vermont, and if one of the jokes about people in Vermont, when they lose their way and they ask somebody, the Vermonters will go, yeah, you can get there from here, and they don't want to tell you anything. And my mother did buy a farm in Vermont, and we are not that close with our neighbors because we were from Connecticut, and they just think of Connecticut people as, no, we don't want you here. So we have a couple of neighbors who are from like Long Island and New Jersey that are very friendly and have made it a point to get to know us. But then there are other neighbors that are on the boundaries of our land that we don't. No, we're not going to talk. Actually, yes. The answer is yes. I do think that they could happen somewhere else.
Could. I think even my neighborhood, growing up in Queens, I think it could happen there.
Yeah.
You know, really. And I had a conflict with my father, and so when I say some of the lines to him, I wish those lines my father had ever said to me before he died, but he never did. And so that really means something to me, that scene we have when I'm on my deathbed.
Right. Yeah. And it's another thing about having, like Amy said, a small rural community, is that the characters are, number one, they're really tied to the land. That's what really defines them.
Yeah.
And the number of options that they have are really very limited.
Unless they leave.
Unless they leave.
Right.
How does your character feel about being a farmer, about being on this land?
He's got a love-hate
wakes
relationship.
up every day and goes, okay, here we go.
No, there's a line that he has about not feeling any joy, but he's doing what he must, and that's what I feel like he is. He's doing what he must, what he thinks he has to do to keep going, but he doesn't really feel any pleasure in it. He's a dreamer, you know. Shanley describes him as having the eyes of an intense dreamer, and he's a guy who thinks beyond, you know, the farm and what the world is, but he's stuck to the farm. He has another line where he says he came up out of it like a tree, and here it is with him all around him. And so he's stuck there, but he's thinking somewhere else. He's thinking to the sky.
if these people are so unhappy where they are, why don't they leave?
I think that's what makes it distinctly Irish too, though, is that, that's sort of where it grounds it, is that there is sort of an unhappy happiness that happens too. There's a lot of,
sure.
the play is very funny. It's very,
Oh, yeah.
there's a lot of jokes, there's a lot of things that happen, and there's a lot of good-natured humor in it as well. It's not just all depressing and sad, but
Right.
it's they're happy and they're not happy. They don't.
Right.
I think that's the source of the play. Is they're all trying to get happy, and figuring out how to get happy in their environment.
Yeah, and the environment it's very distinct. It's not just rural. It's rural very specifically. He said he went back to, after he wrote the play, he went back to the farm where his ancestors had grown up and still lived, and where his cousin Anthony still looks after 80 animals on the farm. And he said after he wrote the play, he held the play up like it was tracing paper over the farm to see what the differences were. And he said the differences were that I wasn't writing about these people, I was using these people to write about me.
Interesting. Interesting.
So, but it is distinctly Irish. He also said that things happen in Ireland, especially in small rural Ireland, that wouldn't happen anywhere else. Most of his early plays that he wrote were about Italian Americans, because he grew up in an Italian American neighborhood. That's the ones he's most famous for. Like what's the movie with Sharon?
Moonlight.
Moonstruck. Right. And he said he was at a funeral when he was younger, and it was an Italian funeral, and a woman came running down the aisle and threw herself on the casket screaming, "You can't leave me, you can't leave me." He said that would never happen at an Irish funeral, ever.
Yeah, right.
Because it's not that the feelings aren't there, but like you guys were saying, the feelings are somewhat restricted. And that's maybe why they come out in such a lyrical way.
Yeah, right.
You know, I was, the other day when we were talking, I said that things are said lyrically, and it's not because the playwright wrote them that way. Well, obviously he did, but because this is how the characters speak. So instead of saying, I don't remember who says that. Oh, I think Rosemary says this. Instead of saying, or who is it? He shot that gun a lot. What is? Remember how that's described?
Oh, yeah, he tore holes in the
Tore
sky.
holes in the
He
sky
tore
with that
holes
gun.
in the
I
sky
say
with that gun.
yeah.
Yeah. It's a very lyrical way to say it, and it's a way to get these things out lyrically that guards you from openly being very emotional about it.
Right.
What's the other? Oh, instead of saying "I'm always short of breath," your character says,
I'm always short of breath. Oh, I'm caught.
"I'm gasping."
I'm gasping like a hurdy-gurdy with the like an old hurdy-gurdy with the emphysema.
Right. It's a wonderfully descriptive picture of this, and that kind of language goes all through the play. But I think one of the things to remember is that this is a very funny play. These are very funny people, and it veers from a kind of gallows humor into a much brighter humor, and then right into anger and pain all over again. And it's a very swift movement from one to the other here, which, from what I understand, is very Irish also. These are some of the most eloquent people in the world, I think. And that's what Shanley had to say about the Irish in general, but certainly it's true of these people. These people have secrets, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I definitely.
I'm going to tell you something I found out about one of those secrets, but let's talk this. It's not really a spoiler. What are some of the secrets?
Mine is a spoiler.
That's a definite spoiler.
Yeah, this is a spoiler.
It's a definite spoiler. The fact that my character is in love with Anthony is something that I reveal very early on,
For how long
In the
have
play.
you been in love with him?
since I was about 6, or maybe even before.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and how old are you now?
I think at the beginning of the play, 38.
Yeah. Why? Why hasn't anything happened?
Well-
And it's not like, oh, do you live like 5 counties away?
No, no, no. Like literal next door neighbors, born next to each other. They describe her as stubborn to the point of madness. And I think she has it in her mind that he will notice her and he will come to her. And that's what she's waiting for. That's what she's been waiting for. And I think she's prepared to keep waiting for that to happen.
What? Are you aware of this?
No. I don't know. I don't think so. No. I mean,
How
there's
dumb are you?
I'd like to think of it as focused.
On what?
Focused on the farm.
Ah,
And that's I'm working all day on the farm, and there's a lot of focus that goes into that, and some stupidity too.
what else do you think prevents? I mean, you're the mother and father watching these two, and you've been watching them for 30 years, not connect with each other the way you think they should or could. What's it like for you to watch them? Have you done anything about it to try to prompt this relationship to happen?
Well, I'm sworn to an oath not to
That's
reveal what I know about him, and I know why he's not going to get married, but I can't. My wife made me swear, and I can't tell anybody what that is, and it isn't revealed in the play what I am,
Right.
bound by the Bible.
Right.
But it's about him, and why I don't.
We're gonna just leave it at that for now.
Why I don't think he's capable of carrying on the farm after I kick the bucket.
Yeah, I think a mother's intuition. Well, I feel that Aoife's very pragmatic. She's watching this whole thing happen. I think she knows they're going to get together. I know she hopes that they're going together, that they're going to get together. I think she, at one point, she teases. She likes to bring you up, bring the daughter up to Tony, but she teases him with the whole thing about, well, you know, she doesn't like you, you know, she don't like you, and so that wakes him up. Really? What do you mean she doesn't like me? Well, you did something to her when she was young and she didn't like it. So I don't want to give any more away. But
And I say to her, you know, he's not normal. He'll never marry. He's not normal.
And I don't believe you and I don't care.
His cousin, Shanley's cousin Anthony, read the play, but he couldn't come to see it because he couldn't leave the farm. He has 80 animals to take care of, so he could. But his cousin Brendan did come over from Ireland to see the play, and he said, "Thank you for bringing my mother and father back from the dead."
Oh, wow.
So it's very personal and very personally accurate,
Yeah.
I think. Does this play is about these very specific people. They're very specific to the playwright, certainly. But what does this have to do with any of you? Are you just telling a story about these people that lived way over there in the Midlands of Ireland? What is an audience going to have to take from this play?
I think they're going to love the journey of watching the love story happen.
Is it a familiar story in some ways? Are people going to be able to relate to it that way?
You know, I think that they are. I'm thinking of TV series, things like Remington Steele, where the leads don't get together. I mean, you just know that they're going to get together. And there's one more recent than Remington Steele, Castle.
Oh, yeah,
I
right.
think, where two people from different backgrounds are working together professionally, and the audience just knows that there's a chemistry there, and it'll take maybe 16 episodes until they get together.
Right.
It'll take about 5 years for them on Castle or more.
I remember Shanley saying that when he, unlike Doubt or some other plays, Four Dogs and a Bone, everything, when he wrote Moonstruck, when he writes a love story, he writes from the bottom of his soul. And you kind of see the audience, I think, will see that development in this play.
Yeah, I keep thinking about Moonstruck as we work on the play. Just that it's like two misfits that sort of get together and find their way, and that's sort of universal. I mean, who doesn't want love in their life? Who doesn't want to find love one day, and who doesn't have issues with their parents, and who doesn't hate their job at times? And it's a very universal. The big themes are very universal. It's just,
what stops these? What stops this from happening? It's inevitable. Like you said, we know it's a romantic comedy.
But it's only inevitable unless, he comes to his senses and does something. I feel
Why
like...
doesn't he?
Well, that's the question,
There's the
right?
He needs to snap out of it.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
she's Irish. Well, she does her best. She really does her best to snap him out of it, I think. She does try.
Well, there's issues of self-worth. I think he has a lot of issues of self-worth, and he's been put down from the very beginning.
Right,
And his
exactly,
father even
exactly.
is the very first conflict we see in the play is him and his
I
father.
don't give you any confidence. I don't give you any compliments. I don't try and boost your ego or anything. I'm not that kind of father, and that's very Irish.
Yeah, and there's this,
That's
and there's
very
this big secret
Irish when
hanging
the
over our
fathers
heads
don't
that-
give their
that-
sons any compliments, and I can speak for this personally.
Yeah.
They don't give you the bragging. You come home with a trophy from track or something. Big deal. What's that? You're not going to make any money on running track. You got to play some other sport. It's like, and never giving you saying, "Oh, son, that's great. You want another trophy?" That's very Irish.
Until in this play, when does that happen?
Well, let's not give away.
Well, no. I hate to tell you people this, but Jim's character dies in the play.
Don't believe him.
Maybe he does.
Does
We
he?
don't see him.
Yes.
That's true. That's true. We're not there at the actual moment of death.
That's right. That's right.
But it's a really significant scene, and Shanley said himself that he remembered when his father died that he and his father both broke down and started weeping and said things to each other that they had never said to each other before, but they wanted to, and I think that's very, very clear. Also, one of his relatives, actually his Uncle Tony, who did die, called his children into the room, called all of his children into the room when he was on his deathbed, shook each of their hands individually and said goodbye.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the things that I think that everybody can relate to in this play, let me put it this way. Shanley said when he was 60, he looked in the mirror and saw a knife at his throat. It's like, okay, I'm getting old, I'm going to die. Okay, that's when he wrote this play, when he realized that it was almost over.
Yeah.
And he said, the knife at my throat woke me to the beauty of my own people, the fleeting opportunities of life, and the farce of caution.
That's a beautiful.
Farce of caution. Yeah, there's a lot of that in the play. The
Yes.
farce of caution. That's a
Yeah.
lot. That's
Yes.
a big prevalent theme in the play.
Very careful,
Yeah.
very, don't want to take too many chances because things could go bad. So let's just keep things the way they are.
Yeah.
Right. Offer it up. Offer it all up.
Yes,
The drudgery and everything, you offer it all up.
right, yeah.
That's what my parents used to say.
Really? Yeah. Well, he says that this play, and we'll wind up with this pretty quickly, he says that this play is not just descriptive. It is descriptive. It describes these characters that he loves who are his family.
Yeah.
But he says it's also prescriptive. So the play is saying, in some sense, we could still have these values. We could still think this way. We could still talk this way. And he said the play's about what I love, what I value about being alive. It's what makes families exist.
Right.
You know, so in that sense, it is a prescriptive play. It's interesting to think about why the Irish are so reticent to express emotions, but at the same time so lyrical in their language.
Right.
And a lot of things that I've read is that because so much has been taken away from them,
Sure.
That makes sense.
their land,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Sure.
you know, their language was taken away from them.
Yep.
Dancing, we've all seen the Irish step dancing. The reason that exists is because the church took away other kinds of dancing because they thought it was too dangerous.
Right.
So they were only allowed to dance with their
Right.
hands
You
and
have
their
to-
arms down at their,
Right.
yeah.
You had to make room for the Holy Ghost in between.
Yes.
And that's why they
Oh,
couldn't
really?
get
Is
that
that what-
close. Yeah, right. You couldn't touch. When you were dancing slow, the nuns, when I grew up too, they'd come between and the brothers, and they'd say, make room for the Holy Ghost. And you'd have to
Yeah,
spread
yeah,
apart.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, it sounds like that we're describing a play that's very frustrating. Like nobody gets what they want. You know?
It's not though.
But it's such a treat to, well, for me, it's a treat to work with 4 remarkable actors, all of whom I've had the fortune to work with before. But it's also a treat to watch these people finally get what they deserve. Finally. And it'll be fascinating for the audience because the audience will desperately want these two to get together.
Yeah, oh yeah.
We all know that they're perfect for each other.
Yeah.
We know that. And so it's fascinating to watch how that almost happens and then it doesn't and then it finally will. I'm giving away the end of it. They do get together.
In
Now,
real life as well. It's good.
Yeah.
in real life as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yes,
right.
these two. How long ago did you two get together?
Oh, we got together 20 years ago.
20. It'll be 20 years this New Year's Eve,
Yeah.
and it's our 11th wedding anniversary while we're here
anniversary while
in
we're
New
here.
Hampshire.
Oh, really?
Yeah, October
Cake?
6th.
Okay. Well, a great big thank you to the 4 of these wonderful people for talking with me about this today. And I hope you'll be able to come and see them work and see this lovely, lovely play. I think you'll be touched by it. I know you will laugh. And it's a great way to start out our 12th season here at Shaker Bridge Theater. So thank you all for coming, and thank you for coming.